Okay, welcome back everybody. And this lecture will take a look at what is probably the most important thing about doing a research essay, and it involves what are called in-text citations. Now, a lot of people are familiar with constructing a works cited page for the references that they use in a research essay. That's part of it, but we also have to have in-text citations. This is not optional, this is required. Failure to use in-text citations properly and efficiently will result in plagiarism, and plagiarism is the theft of ideas, passing those off as your own, and result in a zero. So you have to be really, really careful when you're constructing a research essay. So now, scroll down, we'll get started here. There's the basic rules here in the handout that we'll go through and cover. Rule number 1 is author named in a signal phrase. Okay, so here's the example of the signal phrase. Christine Hoffney reports that shortly after Japan made it illegal to use a handheld phone while driving, accidents caused by using the phones dropped by 75%. A8, period. Now, what we mean by a signal phrase. Notice how this sentence started. How did it start? What did we name? We named the author at the front of the sentence. You see that? Then what we did is that it continued, right? We named the author there. Christine Hoffman reports that. And then we continued the sentence. And then what do we have? Something really important. Boom, boom. What do we have there? Quotation marks. Now, everything that's included in between the quotation marks, what this is a direct quote. Now, what a lot of people, when they encounter this, they go, oh wow, Mr. K, so I can copy word for word? And the answer is, provided that you give credit to the author. You see how we did that at the front? And then we also include the page number at the end, and then we have to be sure that we enclose that quoted information inside of quotation marks. So it's perfectly okay to do this, but we have to be careful that the direct quote does not take over the paragraph. So what does that mean? Now let me drop in here. This is the example paper, right? And by being careful that it doesn't take over the paragraph. Okay? So this is in the example paper. This is the first page, the first body paragraph. Now I have a direct quote in here, right? Frank Kuznick writes. This is what's this called again? A signal phrase. And then I continue, right? So I begin a sentence. This is all me, okay? And then what do I start to do? Copy word for word. So what do? I open up quotation mark, okay? Now, this was a really long quote. So look what I had to do. I had to create what's called an ellipse. This is when you realize that you have a direct quote that is way too big and would take over a paragraph. We can't do this, guys. So what we have to do is we have to create an ellipse, and we have to use ... to show the reader where we have cut out from the direct quote. Then when I'm done direct quoting, boom, I close the quote. Same thing down here, right? You see at the front, the signal phrase, then open up the quote. Then what do I have here? I create an ellipse, the ... Why do I have the ... It's a really long quote. I don't want the long quote to take over the paragraph. When I'm done, what do? Boom, I close the quote. So it's okay, perfectly okay, to quote, copy word for word, provided that we create a signal phrase. Name the author in the front, open up the quote, and be sure to close the quote. And you'll notice that where does the period go? Boom. Very good. So that's rule number 1. Now, rule number 2 is author named in parentheses. Right? Now, this is a little bit different, this example here. Most states do not keep adequate records on the number of times cell phones are a factor in accidents, such as December 2000. Only 10 states were trying to keep such records. Sundin 2. Now, at the end of the sentence, you'll notice that what do I have? I have parentheses, and then I put in the author's last name. Sorry for that jump. There we go. I put in the author's last name, and then 2. This is the page number. Now, why is the author's last name found at the end? And the answer is because the author's last name is not found at the beginning of the sentence. Very simple. Now, this example, number 2, is a paraphrase. What is a paraphrase? That's when you read from the research, you put it into your own words. So since we're not copying, this is not a direct quote, there's no quotation marks, right? And you'll notice that there's no punctuation between the name and the page number. And where does the period go? At the end. Now, number 3, believe it or not, this often happens. I'm going to put a star here. Author unknown. For some reason, with a lot of journalistic writing, the author is not listed. So then what you have to do is you have to use either the complete title in a signal phrase or a short form of the title inside of the parentheses. So here's an example. As of 2001, at least 300 towns and municipalities had considered legislation regulating the use of cell phones while driving. Lawmakers, 2. Now, is the person who wrote this, is his or her last name Lawmakers? No. Why do we have Lawmakers here? Is because that's a short form of the title of the article that had author unknown. And then came from the second page, and again the period goes here, it goes at the end. And again, this is a paraphrase, not a direct quote. If it was a direct quote, there would have been the signal phrase, quotation marks. Now, this next one, number 4, this is very, very common in the 21st century. This deals with things that we get from everybody's favorite place, the interwebs. Now, there's no page numbers in cyberspace. There's no what? Page numbers. Therefore, what we have to do is we have to treat such sources as unpaginated. In other words, what the printer, the numbering system that the printer spits out onto the pages, we have to ignore. So then this is what it looks like in this example. The California Highway Patrol opposes restrictions on the use of phones while driving, claiming that distracted drivers can already be prosecuted. Jacobs. Now, who is Jacobs? That is the author of this. And is this sentence a paraphrase or a direct quote? It's a paraphrase. How do we know? There's no quotation marks. Why is there no page number here? Because it came from the interwebs. And as always, the comma goes afterwards. Now, these 4 basic rules are going to carry you through the research essay. What follows next are some variant rules that you may or may not encounter. They're very clear in their descriptions there. Right, so now let me really quick jump back to the example research essay that I've done. Now, what you want to do as you're writing your paper, every so often you just want to check it. You should see stuff like this going on. Right, what do we see here? Citations, page numbers, last names, right? You see all this stuff going on? Right, this is good. What do we see here? Quotation marks. Is this good or is this bad? This is good, right? This is the sign of a successful research essay because what does it have? In-text citations. This is how we give credit for borrowed information, both in the form of direct quotes, like we see in light blue, and paraphrases. Now, please be sure to remember that using in-text documentation is required. Anytime you use a direct quote or a paraphrase, you must cite it. It is not an option, it is required. So I urge everyone to please go back and review this lecture 2 and 3 times, as well to go through the example paper to see how all of those in-text citations fall in place.